Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening. How are you? Fine. So we are going to cover the 5 most important topics from environment. Okay, that has been important in this last week. All right. So first of all, we will start with the year-end review by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Right. So it is important for us from what point of view? When we talk about environment, from what point of view it is important? Because when we talk about energy, we also talk about how that energy is being produced. That is, how much of carbon dioxide emissions are you going for when you are producing this much amount of energy, right? And correlated with this fact is your carbon emissions intensity. When we talk about emissions intensity, what do we mean? Emissions intensity means that how much of absolute emissions are you going for divided by the GDP. Okay, that is how we calculate the emissions intensity of an economy. Okay, but if I have to calculate emission intensity of an economic activity, then I would be dividing it by the output. That is, how much of emissions are you going for with respect to the output that you're generating, right? That is what your intensity is. That is how we classify some industries as highly polluting industries, right? So with respect to Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, similarly, we are talking about fuels. We are talking about the energy efficiency. We are talking about how much of it is going to change the climate, right? So it is important for us to understand how it is going to transitioning into renewable sources of energy, right? And what are the efforts that are taken by Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, right? So what were the key achievements in this year? One is related to Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Have you heard of this scheme? What is Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana? Yes, that is they are going to provide for LPG connections. Okay, and there has been a rise. How much? By 10.35 crore. More beneficiaries have been added during this year. Okay, why is LPG important? Under PM Ujjwala Yojana, what was the problem that was being sorted out when we brought in the scheme? Yes, indoor pollution. Why indoor pollution? Because of cooking. Okay, so now we are trying to transition into clean cooking processes. Okay, we want to have this kind of a gas already available so that the women in the household, they are not burning the biomass. They are not bringing firewood from the jungles and burning it. Okay, in effect, they are exposing themselves as well as the children to harmful gases, right? And indoor pollution is much more dangerous than your outdoor pollution, right? Because it gets accumulated and you are the one who is inhaling it without any kind of outlet. It is a closed system, right? Secondly, there is 8,400 plus CNG stations that we have established. Okay, what is CNG? So the main component of this is natural gas. What is natural gas? Methane. Okay, main component is methane. Methane is having a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. Why? And why are we trying to promote it as one of the cleaner fuels? One thing is that it is cleaner because it does not go for any kind of particulate matter. Very less amount of particulate matter is being emitted. The second thing is that it has more amount of calorific value. That is, it is going to give you more amount of energy versus the quantity that it is burnt. Okay, versus any other biomass, if you go for a burning process of any solid component, then there is necessarily emission of suspended particulate matter, what we call as the particulate matter 2.5 and 2 PM10. These two particulate matters will be emitted whenever you are burning something that is solid. Okay, so we have in question coal. If you burn coal, then you are going to get PM 2.5, you are going to get PM10, apart from other sources of pollution, right? So we are going for CNG stations. While it is not the cleanest one, but it is at least cleaner than the previous ones, right? Then we have 19.24% of ethanol blending. Okay, have you heard of ethanol blending of petrol? What is it? What is ethanol? Right. So this means, why are we going for blending? One is from the environment point of view, right? It is going to give me a cleaner fuel as compared to the whole component being of petrol, right? There would be higher carbon dioxide emissions. With blending, there would be less amount of these kind of emissions. The second thing is that we keep in mind the import, right? With respect to crude oil, you might have come across a figure which says how much of crude oil do we import? Near about 83%. Okay, so this much of crude oil is being imported. One. Second, it is also harmful. Petrol, if you burn, whole petrol, if you burn it, then it will be emitting much more amount of carbon dioxide emissions as compared to when you blend it. Okay, so India has already achieved E10, what we call as E10. E10 means that there is 10% of blending already done. Okay, that was done way back in 2022. Now we are progressing towards, we had a target of achieving E20. E20 meaning blending percentage is 20%, right? So we have achieved already this much for the target year of 2025-2026, right? So these are some of the achievements that we have, right? Also, along with that, we have increased our marketing infrastructures, okay? Because we need to advertise also, and also we need to have some kind of infrastructure in place with respect to the electric vehicles, right? So this infrastructure has also expanded and is counted as an achievement under this review, okay? Then moving on to gas grid expansion, okay? What are we talking about gas? When we are talking about gas, we are talking about, again, which gas? Methane, right? We are talking about methane in general. And unified pipeline tariff regime. 90% of pipelines under one nation, one grid, and one tariff. Okay. Earlier, what used to happen that pipelines would be extended from one location to the another. Okay. So there is a huge amount of logistical cost. That is, how will you transport this natural gas from its source to the destination? Okay, and this transport cost used to be added to the production as well. Okay, this means that it will get very, very expensive for the people who are living in the far-flung states, right? So there is a policy that we have one nation, there should be one grid, that is, it should be connected, interconnection should be there, and one tariff, that is, it should be uniform. It should not be having some kind of regional disparity, okay? That is needed so that people start adopting these cleaner fuels, okay? So with respect to that, 25,429 kilometers of gas pipeline has already been operational, and another 10,459 kilometers is under execution, okay? Under this program, we had a total of 34,000 kilometers pipeline plan. Okay, and that is also going to get operational with just this 10,000 that is being under execution, right? Then these are facts. 1 crore 57 lakhs PNG connections have been established, and democratizing access to clean cooking fuel across urban and rural India. Okay, when we talk about distribution of resources, we talk about three things. Okay, what do we talk about? One is affordability, second is availability, and third is quality. Okay, availability, or you could say accessibility. Okay, unless you are meeting all of these three plans, you are not observing security. That means if you are talking about food security, then you should have food grains that are affordable. Okay, even if they are available, it should also be accessible. Okay, that is one of the problems with respect to food security, that we do not have the important people, the beneficiaries under this National Food Security Act, having this access to food grains. Okay, similarly with respect to energy as well. With respect to energy security, when we talk about energy security, we talk about first, is there an availability? Second, is the quality up to the mark? Third, is it affordable? Right? So these are the things that we utilize in making the policy. Understanding all of these things are checked, right? So with respect to one tariff, one grid means that I am going for accessibility. One nation, one tariff means affordability, right? Similarly, this is what you call as democratizing distribution of resources. Okay. Then clean mobility push, that is, we have been going forward with electrical vehicles. Okay, electric vehicles and their charging stations. Charging stations are one of the important pillars of your urban mobility when we talk about electric vehicles, right? So there is charging stations set up nationwide, more than 27,400. 4,000 energy stations are planned as multi-fuel hubs with 1,064 already operational, right? We are just not depending upon the renewable energy sources. We are not just depending upon the electric vehicle. We are also going for multi-fuel. Multi-fuel meaning, what does multi-fuel mean? Just the name itself. Okay, it should not, that is, in the market, we have to transition. We are transitioning from EVs and the vehicles that use fossil fuels. Okay, and in the transition zone lies your hybrid vehicles, right? So this means that to sustain those kind of vehicles as well, to have that kind of a just transition, to have that kind of affordability as well, when we are going from this side to this side, right? We will have multi-fuel hubs. Okay. Compressed biogas blending mandated from financial year 2025 to 26, and sustainable aviation fuel roadmap set up with 1 to 5% blending targets. Okay, even with respect to aviation fuel, we have a huge amount of carbon emissions, near about 1 to 3%. Okay, 1 to 3% of global emissions is caused by this aviation industry, right? So even in that case, we are going for a blending target from 2027, right? Now, there has been another reforms and strategic reserves. So with respect to legislative framework, we have one act, that is Oil Fields Regulation and Development Amendment Act and Petroleum and Natural Gas Rules 2025. The most important amendment that has been done, that is, earlier we used to go for different treatment for different fuels, different hydrocarbons. Okay, which means that we are treating every hydrocarbon as separate. It means that if you are going for exploration, you need a certain license for each of the hydrocarbon that you are going to explore. Okay, now after the amendment, this is being replaced by single petroleum lease. This is the most important reform that has happened. Okay, we are not separating the mining and petroleum licensing. Okay, so this means that it is very easy for you to get a license, and it means that it will give a push towards what? Exploration. What will exploration result into? It will result into finding of domestic oil fields. Okay, domestic oil fields means that your import cover can be reduced, right? Which is presently around 83%. This can be reduced, right? So this means that if there is conflict like Russia-Ukraine war is there, right? So you would not be ending up paying more, right, for those days, right? The second thing is exploration expansion. Okay, so this is HELP 2016. Do you know the full form? Hydrocarbon Exploration Licensing Policy. Okay. Okay, earlier it was NELP, now it is HELP. Okay, so it became HELP in 2016. We have blocks covering over 3.7 lakh square kilometer awarded, attracting committed investments of about $4.36 billion. This means that we are again pushing towards more of exploration, right? Strategic reserves. What do you understand by strategic reserves? What? Yes, this means for the rainy days, which means that if you have days wherein you are not getting oil from anywhere, okay, so do you have some reserves stored for you for those bad days? That is what your strategic petroleum reserves are. Okay, so this had two phases up until now. Phase 1 has already been completed, and we have our strategic petroleum reserves. There are certain locations where this storage of oil has to take place, right? It cannot be done everywhere. Okay, there has to be considerations of temperature, right? There has to be considerations of various other factors. So phase 2 is starting, and it is in Chandikol, Odisha, and Paddur, that is in Karnataka itself, right? And already so many locations: Vishakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh, Mangaluru, and Paddur. Okay, so these are the present status with respect to the strategic petroleum reserves. Do you know how many days should a country have the petroleum reserves for? It should be, as per International Energy Agency, it is 90 days. That means if you cover yourself up for 90 days, you have 90 days worth of strategic reserves, then you are safe, right? And presently, with respect to building this up, because it requires a lot of space, because it requires a lot of security, because it will require a lot of insurance, okay, it is a very costly affair for setting up what kind of strategic petroleum reserves we should have, where the location should be, okay, where it cannot be attacked by any kind of miscreants from the cross border, right? So there are multiple things that we keep in mind, and this is very expensive to create, but it is much more better to have this rather than we have lacking when we want it. Okay, so what are the challenges to energy security? So first is high import dependence. Okay, both with respect to your petroleum reserves as well as your natural gas, for 85% of crude oil and 50% of natural gas. Okay, and also domestic crude production. Domestic crude production, one is that you do not have domestic production is also falling. Okay, and third is the increasing price due to the crisis, due to the various kind of crisis. So this creates opportunities that you will have less amount of oil present with you, and you are a growing emerging economy, right? This is something that you cannot go on forward with. So we have high import dependence, and to solve this problem of high import dependence, that is all the reasons that we are going for strategic petroleum reserves. That is the reason that we are going for what? Exploration, right? Exploration, and that is the reason we are going for single petroleum lease, right? Then geopolitical vulnerability. Again, you are subjected to, when you are having high import, that means you are also being subjected to the geopolitical reality of the day, right? It means that one of the reasons why Naira Energy is an Indian company, okay, and it was having sanctions from the European Union. What was the reason? The reason was that Rosneft, it is a Russian oil exploration energy company, right? So it had 49% stake in this Indian company called Naira Energy. And that became the reason for which European Union placed sanctions, because Russia and Ukraine war was there and they wanted to crumble Russia to their place, right? So this means that even India will have some kind of repercussions, okay, going forward with respect to energy security. This is a geopolitical vulnerability that even our companies would be exposed to, right? Then majority of crude imports originate in volatile Middle East. Okay, volatile Middle East. So you must be hearing about the wars in the Middle East, right? You will have Gaza war, right? Israel, Palestine, right? And then we will have Red Sea also. So basically what we are talking about is how does your energy transfer, how does the petrol transfer, how does the crude oil transfer from one place to the another. It is usually using the shipping routes, right? And if the shipping routes are at the choke points, what are choke points? Strait of Malacca is a choke point, right? Red Sea, if it is being, inhabited by the terrorist organization, then they would be invading the ships that are crossing those areas, right? That means those are the choke points. That means any kind of crude oil that is being transported from one country to the other is being delayed because of such kind of operations. Maybe it is not going to reach at all, okay? And because of these choke points, there would also be a possibility that they will not utilize that route and they would be taking another longer route, okay? For example, Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, right? They would be using that, and therefore the time would increase. This means the supply would also be costly. The logistical cost will go up, right? So we are exposed to such kind of geopolitical vulnerability as well, okay, when we are talking about high import dependence. The third thing is critical minerals dependency. We are 100% import dependent, okay, for 10 critical minerals, and it is our competing economy, the economy that we try to compete with, okay. The emerging economies are BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So we are called the emerging economies, right? And we try to compete with each other because we have somewhat similar kind of economic conditions, social conditions, and cultural conditions, right? So we try to compete with each other, and China controls 90% of rare earth processing and 95% of graphite processing and 79% of refined cobalt production. This means that China sits at the head of the global supply chain of these rare earth materials, right? This means that if we happen to go for any kind of tensions, we usually have border tensions. We have Galwan Valley, right? 2017. Galwan Valley was there. Then Doklam Plateau. All of these were face-offs between the Indian forces and the Chinese forces, right? So if we have any such kind of tensions, border related tensions with our neighboring country, then it means that our dependency will again be vulnerable to any kind of shock that China chooses to give us, right? That means that I must protect myself for having this kind of energy security. Otherwise, my availability as well as accessibility is going to be threatened. It is going to be in another hand, and therefore that will also result into dissolving of sovereignty of a nation, right? You would be influenced by their own actions, right? Now, infrastructure and storage constraints. Okay. So India's non-fossil fuel capacity has reached around 217 gigawatts, but faces critical constraints from transmission delays, corridor congestion, and subdued demand. Okay, this is again we are talking about that even if you have high amount of food, even if you are having high amount of energy, even if your renewable energy is at a higher stage, then are people adopting it? Have you made it accessible? What are the challenges that are there with respect to making it reach the destination from the source, right? So we are facing a lot of constraints with respect to transmission delays. Okay, with the nature of renewable energy we also get problems. What kind of problems do we have with respect to renewable energy sources? One is your infrastructure, right? When we talk about electric vehicles, it cannot be ended with the discussion without noticing that there is inadequate battery technology, right? Lithium ion batteries. So we are talking about that, are there any kind of recharging stations? Suppose my car stops in between, then do I have a recharging station in between, right? Or if I have solar power energy, then can I store that energy for a longer period of time when the sun is not shining, right? So those kind of questions have to be answered. And there is corridor congestion, there is subdued demand. These create problems with respect to renewable energy. Even with respect to hydrogen fuel, we are talking about green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen? And what is brown hydrogen, or what is other colored hydrogen? Hmm. Yes. So this means that this hydrogen that is being produced, why? Because it will require a huge amount of energy, exothermic reaction, right? So this means that you need to deliver to this reaction a huge amount of energy. But that energy, where are you getting that energy from? So if you are getting it from coal, if you are getting it from fossil fuels, then that will result into what kind of hydrogen? Brown hydrogen, right? But if you are using renewable energy to give that energy to the reaction so that hydrogen fuel is being produced for us, then it becomes green hydrogen. And this is the pathway that we need to have in place. Okay, otherwise there is no use of having green hydrogen, right? Ultimately you are burning coal, right? So the other thing is that there is no diversification. Okay, with respect to renewable energy sources, you can only have them at certain places. So 60% of large scale solar and wind projects are concentrated just in 3 states, that is Gujarat, Rajasthan and Tamil Nadu, for appropriate reasons, right? In Rajasthan and Gujarat we have arid and semi arid areas, we have more amount of sun shining, right? It means that there is less amount of cloud cover also. Cloud cover will reflect back the sunlight. Okay, so maximum intensity of sunlight can be felt in Gujarat and Rajasthan. And with respect to Tamil Nadu, because it is at the coast, you will have higher amount of wind energy being trapped and utilized, right? So this means that we are just focusing on these 3 states. We are not able to diversify. That is also one of the limitations of processing renewable energy sources, right? Third is strategic reserve inadequacy. Okay, when we are talking about energy security, security comes from understanding what do we have as source. Okay, is that source sovereign in nature? Okay, are we able to produce for our own needs? Okay, or are we dependent on others? And if we are dependent on others, are we dependent on enemies or are we dependent on our allies, right? So source and what is the demand? Okay, the difference between the two will create security, right? So India's combined oil storage and SPR, that is strategic petroleum reserve, can sustain about 77 days. Up until now, 77 days. We talked about 2 phases. Phase 1 was in phase 1, Vishakhapatnam, Paddur and Mangaluru, right? And phase 2 is in Chandikol, Odisha and Paddur, right? So IEA's compulsory 90-day mandate. Okay, we just have 77 days. This means 13 days we are short of, right? And the quantified storage capacity, we have just 39 million barrels. This is here, 39 million barrels. While while Japan and China, they have upwards of 500, right? So this means that it is also going to create a problem for us, because with respect to China, we are almost there with respect to the population. The population will create the need for resources, and economic activities will also create the need for resources, and therefore this is highly inadequate. Okay, nearly about 12 times, right? So this becomes a challenge for the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, right? Okay. So what is the roadmap to strengthen energy security? First, boost domestic production. Okay, you understood what were the problems of energy security? We are talking about what is the demand and what is the source, and this is what your energy requirements are in a year, and based on this, how secure you are, right? The demand is already there because of growing population, growing economic activities, right? While the source is mainly imports and very less amount of domestic exploration. Okay, less amount of strategic petroleum reserves, right? This means that not only we are challenged in the day-to-day import levels also, even while we are facing some kind of adversity at geopolitical level, then also we are going to be adversely affected, right? So this becomes energy insecurity, right? So what is the thing that we should do? We should boost domestic production, right? This means that I am trying to strengthen the source itself. I'm trying to find the source within my sovereign means, right? So fully implement Oil Fields Amendment Act, expand Mission Anveshan. Okay, basically Mission Anveshan is also something, have you heard of it? It is also going for exploration of hydrocarbons, right? In Krishna Godavari and Andaman basins, deploy enhanced oil recovery and AI in mature fields like Mumbai High. Bombay High you must have heard of, right? So these are the fields that have earlier also given us huge amount of domestic production, relatively, right? So we must implement this act, start, not discriminating between the different kind of hydrocarbons that we have. The second thing is diversify imports, long-term contracts with these nations. Okay, revive Iranian imports via rupee real mechanism. Okay, have you heard of CATSA? What is CATSA? Yes. So it means that it is countering American adversaries through Sanctions Act. Okay. This means that it is going to sanction against those countries who are getting resources from the countries that they are pushing to be, towards sanction. This means that Iran had this nuclear power, right? And America was against it, right? Then we had this JCPOA, which was then again ruled out. And Iran was one of the contributors to the oil for India, okay, crude oil. We used to import it. And this means that we are also again at the crossroads that US can impose sanctions on us if we are importing oil from Iran. Okay, so we try to cut it down a bit. We try to reduce it. We try to get cheaper oil by Russia, right? So we can go for reviving these kind of imports. And you also see in with respect to international relations how one country can influence the actions of other country. Okay, even when you need such kind of resources, you are getting influenced by a major power, right? So we need to diversify our import because we do not know what kind of international relations will prevail in the future, right? Third is accelerate clean energy, integrate 4-hour battery storage mandate, and scale up national green hydrogen mission. Right? Again, we are talking about green hydrogen mission. Increase ethanol blending to 30% by 2030. Okay, we have already achieved almost 20, right? 19.24%. Mineral self-reliance. Why? Because we are going for 100% import of the critical minerals, 10 critical minerals. Okay, critical minerals are critical. Why? Yes, that is one of the reasons. Criticality depends upon two things. One is how much of supply do you have? Okay, if it is important with respect to renewable energy also, with respect to climate change also, with respect to technologies that are responsible for, having a less amount of climate change, but it is also dependent upon the supply. Okay, if it is abundant in nature, then it is not going to be critical. Okay, it is critical because it is less in supply, or less in supply with respect to the domestic levels, right? So we need to have this kind of a mission, national critical minerals mission, and build domestic refining of minerals through PPPs. What are PPPs? Right? That means we are trying to involve our private sector as well, right? Forge partnerships with Australia and Argentina, the ones that are having more amount of resources and also are not going to be our enemies in the long run, right? Establish national stockpile, promote circular economy. Stockpile means that you must have a buffer stock kind of a thing, right? Like for example, you have food buffer stock, right? And you must promote circular economy. Circular economy means that even from the e-waste, you should derive the important critical minerals back into the system, right? That is much more easier than going for exploration and going for mining, right? That is going to be much more expensive rather than you should just go for cleaning of e-waste and deriving those minerals back again, right? Okay. Then moving on to the next topic, we have right to clean and healthy environment. Clean and healthy environment. Okay. So this is something that is related to your polity section also. Okay. And under the constitution, where do you think it is listed? Fundamental rights, article 21. Okay. That is in short, right to life. Okay. So this means that from right to life, you have golden trinity, article 14, article 19 and article 21. Right, these are the important fundamental rights within the part 3, right? And article 21 for the reasons that we have gone forward from Menka Gandhi case. In Menka Gandhi case, where did we move from? Due process of law or procedure established by law? We had earlier procedure established by law. Okay, now we have moved on to what? Understanding that procedure established by law ultimately means what is due process of law? Yes, okay. Understand this, that arbitrariness is there with respect to two things. One is the legislature and the other is with respect to the rules being implemented by the executive. Okay. So what we had, if we have procedure established by law, it means that it is only going, the Supreme Court is only going to check whether the executive actions were arbitrary or not. Okay, whether the provisions were carried out with respect to the rules or not. Okay, but when we talk about the due process of law, we understand that even the framers of the rules, that is the legislature, were their actions arbitrary or not. Okay, so this means that there is going to be this check and this check as well now. Okay, but the wordings will remain the same. It is still procedure established by law, but it is defined as that arbitrary legislative as well as executive actions are not to be considered, right? So this expands this expands, and this also expands the viewpoint of Supreme Court. That is why you have multiple cases within right to life, Article 21, right? That is, they are checking whether each and every right that is given is to be concordant with right to life or not, right? So one right again is included, that is right to clean and healthy environment. Okay, so there has been recent amendments to the graded response action plan by Commission for Air Quality Management. Okay, both of these terms have been in news in the last 2 weeks, right? We have talked about graded response action plan, right? It is a stage based. You will have multiple stages from 1 to 4, okay, which will have a protocol that will kick in as and when a particular AQI level is reached, okay? And Commission for Air Quality Management, it is a statutory body that was created in 2021, right, on the directions of Supreme Court. So they have made school closures mandatory under severe pollution phases. That is, even at the lower air quality deteriorating phase, they would be having school closures, right? And that is why this right has also come into play. Now, what is the multidimensional environmental crisis that we have? With respect to environmental crisis, we talk about the pollution levels, right? We talk about different types of pollution. What are they? Air pollution, water pollution, your land degradation is there, right? And so on, right? So with respect to air pollution, there are some statistics that you can quote in your answers also. One thing is that India's air pollution crisis has contributed to 2 million of the 8 billion global air pollution related deaths in 2021. That means that we are contributors of near about 25% of global deaths due to air pollution, right? One more fact, very important fact, is that 13 of the 20 cities that are most polluted in the world are there in India. 13 cities, right? You can see World Air Quality Report 2024, 13 of the 20 most polluted cities, right? Then we have water scarcity crisis. Okay, one thing is that water availability and the second thing is contamination. Okay, so in some states you will hear about flooding, in some states you will hear about deficit. Okay, this means that our resource, water, is not being managed properly, or we can have, there is still room for improvement. For example, in Assam, you will have Brahmaputra floods, right? But in Bundelkhand region, you will have water scarcity zones, right? There would be less amount of water that is being available. The second thing that deteriorates the availability as well is the contamination. If the water is beyond use, then you are also then creating what is known as water deficit, right? That is why we have programs where we have interlinking of rivers, right? We want to transfer those zones. We want to transfer the huge amount of water into deficit zones, right? But that is also something as a challenge to the biodiversity. That is also a challenge to the tribal populations who are living. Okay, that is a problem with respect to the forest, national parks, right? So the per water availability has declined from 1,816 cubic meters in 2001 to 2011, 10 years, 1545, and projected to fall to 1219 meter cube by 2050. Okay, as well as when we are talking about contamination of drinking water, then there have been founding elevated nitrates, fluoride, and arsenic levels, right? You must have heard about the pollution, increasing levels in drinking water, in groundwater, right? Especially in Ganga Delta. Okay, it is highly contaminated with arsenic. Okay, arsenic contamination is there, and it is something that is being passed on from one generation to the other also, right? Fluorosis is something that is caused by increasing fluoride concentration in water. Okay, that results into bending of bones, right? And this is worsened by groundwater depletion and erratic monsoons. Okay, that means that you are already not saturating, you are depleting whatever less amount of resources present for you. That is, you are extracting water out of the ground levels. Second, there is no certainty of monsoons, which means that there is no flow. We do not know how much is incoming, how much is outgoing. Okay, so there is uncertainty with respect to the drinking water as well here. Then biodiversity loss. Deforestation driven by infrastructure, agriculture and mining leads to habitat fragmentation and reduced carbon sequestration. Right, so what is this? When we go for deforestation, when we are talking about environmental crisis, we are going for development. We are talking about environment with respect to development. Right, for development purposes we will have mining operations, for development purposes we will have increasing urbanization. Okay, and all of that is needed to have some kind of forest to be cut down, right? So that will result into biodiversity loss. Okay, and especially in the hotspots. Okay, biodiversity hotspots. How many biodiversity hotspots do we have? Yes, Western Ghats is one of them. Sunda land is there. That is one of the biodiversity hotspots. Himalayas, western, eastern. Okay, so these are hotspots. What do you mean by hotspots? It means that the species, you don't need to know the exact number. If there are some species that are endemic in nature, and secondly their life is threatened, then that becomes a biodiversity hotspot. Okay, it means that 70% of, for example, if we are talking about plants, then 1500 vascular plants are there. Okay, various species are there, and 70% of it is getting lost. Okay, so IPCC projections, okay, Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, it says that up to 33% of biodiversity loss by 2050 due to climate change, with India's biodiversity hotspots like Western Ghats facing severe threats. Right? Then land degradation, we talked about land degradation. So land degradation is also something that is important with respect to food security. Right? If you do not have the necessary nutrients in your soil, then how are you going to support food security in your nation? Okay, how are you going to run important acts like National Food Security Act 2013? Right, that is right to food for near about 66% of the population. Right, so it has this much amount of land, that is 84 million hectares, has underwent desertification in 2018-19. Right, this means that there has been loss of nutrients, and that means that you will have to increase the amount of fertilizer. That means that the input cost will go higher. That means agricultural distress will also go higher. That means people will change professions. Yeah, people will move to urban cities. Right, that means again a problem with respect to food security. Okay, so we are talking about environmental crisis that is leading to every such kind of thing. We talked about energy security, we are talking about food security, right? Then waste management. Okay, our collection rate is very good. Okay, up to 95% collection rate is there, but we do not know how to manage the waste. Okay, we have different kind of waste. We have plastic waste, e-waste, we have biomedical waste, construction and demolition waste. Okay, so many waste are there. Then we are not able to formulate a strategy of how these waste should be disposed of. Okay, whether you are going for pyrolysis, that is completely burning it. Okay, or you are going for the plastic waste, whether you are recycling it, whether you are reusing it. Okay, what is the kind of strategy that you need to have? Even with respect to your previous year question, you have something called as EPR. What is EPR? It was asked in 2019 previous year question. It is extended producer responsibility. What does this mean? It means that if I am a seller and I am giving you a plastic bag, then I will have to collect that as well. Okay, it becomes my responsibility as a producer to get it back from you. Okay, I can utilize some kind of monetary incentive. For example, on some plastics you will find that it is written that if you if you give 1 kg of these kind of plastics to us, we will pay you so much amount. Right, so these kind of collection centers must be placed. right? So the strategy has to evolve. First, the strategies are already known to us, but it has to be implemented within the governance framework, right? That is why we have waste rules, waste management rules, right? Solid waste management rules is there, and so many rules are there, right? So moving on, these are some of the cases that were important with respect to environment. Okay, sometimes it becomes important even with respect to your GS2 paper. Okay, sometimes they will ask you what are some of the important cases related to environment that has led to environment jurisprudence. Okay, the first is 1978. Okay, Menka Gandhi Act. Sorry, not Act, Menka Gandhi case, right? Supreme Court opined that clean environment shall be included in the meaning of life. Okay, understand this, that when we are talking about the Menka Gandhi case, we were just talking about the bodily existence. Okay, that is, when you're talking about life, you're just saying that whether the body exists or not, whether that individual exists or not, that is what is right to life. But when we went for expansion under Menka Gandhi case, we understood that this existence is not just limited to the body part, it is also related to your mind, it is also related to your personality. Okay, that means that even if you are, you must have avenues to develop your personality, not just body. Okay, so the limitation was lifted and it was expanded, and therefore to have those kind of things in place, it was understood that the meaning of life should include clean environment, right? The second was in 1985 rural litigation case. Okay, all these cases, just remember the name and also try to remember the principles that were evolved in these cases, right? So it was first recognition to right to life in a healthy environment as part of Article 21, right? Rural litigation case, right? Then most important, 1986 MC Mehta case. It stated that right to live in a pollution-free environment is a part of fundamental right. Okay, what this states is, what this gave was absolute liability principle. Okay, we have various kinds of principles that are important from environment point of view. One is precautionary principle, the other is absolute liability principle, then we have polluter pays principle. These are important principles that if you state with respect to these cases, then it will give you more marks, right? So 1986 MC Mehta case was there, right? Absolute liability means, that means that if you are going for any kind of environmental crisis, if there is any kind of environmental crisis, for example, in this case, what had happened was there was a leakage of oleum gas. What this resulted into? It resulted that there were many deaths. Okay, many kind of people were facing problems that were passed on to their further generations, right? So in this case, it was argued that the industries cannot just say that I have taken care of everything and this was something that was beyond my reach. That is, this is an act of God. Okay, so there has to be absolute liability. Okay, it will not be tolerated that if you are going for any kind of environmental crisis because of your industrial expansion, right? Then in 1991 we had Subhash Kumar versus State of Bihar. Supreme Court combined Article 48A and Article 51A Clause G. Okay, what is 48A? And since it is A, capital A, it means it is an amendment. It is introduced by an amendment. It was introduced by your 42nd Amendment. And this is your fundamental duty. So with respect to state and with respect to the citizens of the state, okay, both the state and the citizen have the duty to protect their environment. Okay, it is an article that is related to protecting of environment and its constituents like wildlife and biodiversity, right? So ruling that state must protect and improve the environment for pollution-free air and water. Okay. Then again we have 1996 MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath. Kamal Nath was a union minister. Okay. and it defined public trust doctrine. This is another doctrine that we have. Okay, we had absolute liability principle. We will have further precautionary principle and polluters pay principle. We also have public trust doctrine. Public trust doctrine means that there is a social contract between the state and its citizens. It means that whatever resources the state owns, it is responsible to protect them, and the public owes its trust to the state. Okay, this means that the state is not an owner, it is just a trustee. Okay, the one who guards the resources of the public, right? So this means that public trust doctrine was also established. 1996 Vellore Citizens Forum understand the precautionary principle and polluter pays principle. What do you mean by precautionary principle? That, for example, if you are setting up an industry, okay, and you are uncertain of any kind of scientific mismanagement that can take place, you are uncertain. Okay, there are possibilities. 90% is that there will be no environmental crisis, but 10% chance exists, or rather you say 0.001% chance is there that environmental crisis can occur. Then you should take the necessary precautions. Okay, that is your precautionary principle. That is, we will have very strict action against the ones who had some possibility of creating environmental crisis and still did not have any safeguards. Okay, polluter pays principle. What do you mean by polluter pays principle? The person who is polluting is going to pay for the emissions, right? That means that it is also concordant with what we known as what is this? Common but differentiated different responsibilities. It means that there has been emissions that have taken place historically and we are not responsible for it. It is the developed nations, right? And that means that it is the polluter who is going to pay. That is why we derive the rationale of saying that there has to be technology transfer and there has to be increased amount of financing, right? And then in 2024 we have MK Ranjit Singh versus Union of India. Okay, recognized right against adverse effects of climate change under Article 21 and Article 14. Okay, very, very important. So what happened in this case was, there were two competing things. One was renewable energy source, okay, that is the power transmission lines were there, and secondly it was competing with the biodiversity, okay, Great Indian Bustard. Okay, so there were overhead transmission lines for the renewable energy sources. So it said that both of the things have to be harmonized. You cannot say that one is more important than the other. Okay, even if you are pursuing renewable energy for the environment, you cannot destroy the biodiversity habitats, right? Okay, so this is, I think we covered in the last class also, Grade Response Action Plan, that is Commission for Air Quality Management, and what is GRAP. And there has been a minor amendment that even with respect to severe, earlier we were going for stage 4 severe plus, where we were going for school closures, but now we are going for even with respect to stage 3, right? So what are some key challenges that we have? One is governance and implementation gaps. Okay, every time whenever we have a policy, there would be a problem with respect to implementation of things. Okay, policies are by default, it is difficult to define them, it is difficult to formulate them, it is difficult to have implementation on ground, it is difficult to monitor them, it is difficult to evaluate them, right? These are governance frameworks that will always have a challenge, right? So with respect to environmental laws also, it will have chronic weak enforcement weak enforcement implementation, right, with industries often operating without valid permits and facing minimal punitive actions, right? So developmental pressures also, we will talk about sustainable development when we say that development is competing with the environmental conservation, right? Ecological complexities, that is when we talk about ecology, we are talking about something that is borderless, but we are combining it with the problem of political boundaries, right? This means that any kind of biodiversity that crosses over between two states or say between two countries also, then how do you conserve it? That is a very big problem, right? So we have such kind of sanctuaries that or national parks that are running over the border as well, right? Political and behavioral hurdles. Okay, short development through populist subsidies. Okay, it is just about vote banks, right? We are more concerned about vote banks rather than going for any kind of environmental conservation, because environment will not give you votes, right? It is the people, it is the companies who will have such kind of financial capacity, right? These are some of the major initiatives that have been taken under conservation. Okay. And we go on with again air quality, air pollution in Delhi. Okay, so a third of Delhi's air pollution forms in the sky itself. Okay, it means that I'll give you the summary of it. Delhi's air pollution, we are tracking, earlier we were tracking according to the air quality index, right? Now we have observed that it is not just the primary pollutants, it is also the secondary pollutants. Okay, what is the difference between the two? Primary pollutant is with respect to how it is being emitted and it stays in its original form, right? Secondary pollutant is that it was not generated in its original form, it is due to some kind of chemical reactions. Okay, and now it has been found that 1/3 of the air composition is composed of ammonium sulfate. Okay, ammonium sulfate, that is, this is what it is. Okay, and we are going from, because there has been emissions of sulfur dioxide will mix with what? Water. Okay, water, and then it will create your sulfate ions, weak sulfate ions, right? And this will result into combining with ammonium ions or ammonia, right? And this will result into your ammonium sulfate, right? So during prolonged smog spells and helping explain why air quality can deteriorate sharply even when local sources appear under control. Okay, the main problem is that we must identify the sources of pollution. Okay, sources of pollution once identified, it will result into closure of those kind of sources. That is what we talk about with respect to the grade response action plan, right? But this is something that is, we are not understanding that the source is there, even locally closing down the sources, it will still result into emission of this air quality because it is a secondary pollutant, right? So this is your primary pollutant and this is secondary pollutant. Okay, that is also influenced by your humidity levels, your temperature variations and sunlight exposure. Okay, we have learnt about volatile organic compounds, right? That is responsible for creation of smog, right? Humidity levels is a precursor for your biochemical reactions to take place, right? So ammonium sulfate problem, 33% Delhi's PM 2.5, that is 1/3, and it shoots up post monsoon because monsoon will deliver rains and rains will lead to lowering down of the pollution. Okay, but with respect to after monsoon effects, it increases for 50%, nearly 50%, right? It amplifies in the winter months. Okay, again we have seen multiple times how it amplifies in the winter months. We have temperature inversion. Do you remember? What are the causes? Temperature inversion is there. Then with respect to geography, it is a landlocked place. Second, with respect to population density, we have huge amount of population, huge amount of vehicles. Okay, all of these will lead to release of pollutants, right? Okay. And coal problem. One thing is that so according to various categories of industries, one category is where there is high population. One is there where is the pollution is high. This is million plus. So these are the two places where industries cannot emit a lot of, they cannot burn coal and they cannot have high amount of emissions. This means that there are some categories that are category C that can have certain kind of industrial emissions, right? With respect to these category, in July 2025, government exempted nearly 78% of coal-fired thermal power plants. Okay, so we are talking about that these two categories, while they are exempt, you cannot have industrial emissions here, you cannot place your industries here. There is some category C which will not be these two, which will not have high population, which will not have high pollution. Okay, there it has been exempted. So this is one of the problems that we are seeing, and it has resulted into not letting them to, it is not possible, and it is not required for them that they will install these systems. That is flue gas desulfurization. What is this? Flue gas is the exhaust gas that is coming out of these industries when you burn coal. Okay, so it is a mixture of gases, and then it will also, this kind of a flue gas will have a component, because coal has a component of sulfur, therefore when we burn it, it will result into sulfur dioxide, right? And these will have systems FGD that will desulfurize, that is, it is not going to release sulfur dioxide into the air, right? And one thing with respect to this ammonium sulfate is that it can travel for a very long distance once it is released, right? So even if the source is somewhere else, it can travel to Delhi. Okay, so these are the emissions. Like it has been seen with respect to the satellite based assessment that the states which are having such kind of coal mining operations, they are going to have a lot of ammonium sulfate in their air as well, right? Okay, so these are again why does it occur in winter? Okay, low temperatures, stagnant conditions, temperature inversion, again all of those, same story, right? Now moving on to this biodiversity part. Amazonian stingless bees. They are the world's first insects with legal rights. Insects with legal rights, okay? So no insect, it is something that is very new. It means that they have been given legal rights. For example, we have our fundamental rights, we have our fundamental right to life. Similarly, they also will have their right to enforce, okay? And this is being done by a local governance body, okay? So native stingless bees through a municipal ordinance, right? And it is setting a powerful precedent for the biocultural preservation. Biocultural meaning that it is something that is nature as well as the people. Okay, this is the strongest mode of conservation that we can have. Okay, it is a bottom-up approach, right? So why are bees important? One thing is because of pollination. Okay, they are the great pollinators. Pollinators are also responsible for your food. Okay, and stingless bees, they are said to be stingless, but they are not completely stingless. That is, they are having small amount of projection, small amount of sting, that is vestigial, meaning that it used to exist, but it is too small for any kind of defense, right? It is just that we can observe it with respect to any kind of evolution that has taken place over a period of time. All right. Small news, but the conservation strategies can be used as a best practice in our nation as well, right? Biodiversity champions because they pollinate. The second thing is it is also used in the melipony culture tradition, which means that they are using traditional practices for delivering honey and medicinal use, okay, through these kind of melipony culture, okay. Then this honey that is used, it has a huge amount of anti-inflammatory, antibacterial and antiviral properties. It is also used for the people having cataracts, eye ailments with respect to cataracts, right? You don't need to learn all of these things, but just mention these kind of things in environment paper. You will get good marks. Okay. Threats to survival, as with respect to every other species, it is first is habitat destruction. Okay, one of the what you call as evil quartets. Okay, one is habitat fragmentation and degradation. Okay, so habitat destruction, which means that you are destroying the ecological niche, right? This means that there is deforestation, there is illegal logging in Amazon forest, right? Then agriculture expansion, and with respect to livestock also, there is expansion of cattle grazing. Livestock is one of the huge problems that is leading to grazing farmlands being there and deforestation. People are occupying those places, and it is something that is creating a huge amount of what is known as ranches. Okay. Climate crisis, rising temperatures. Again, with respect to life existing, we are expecting the life to be very sensitive, and therefore it is very sensitive to any kind of rise in temperature. Okay, any kind of increase in salt concentration in water bodies, right? Increased wildfire frequency because of the increased fuel buildup in the forest, and the dryness. It will also create conditions that are more concordant with the wildfires, right? And forced migration to higher elevation to high certain kind of temperatures that are viable to carry out their metabolic processes. All right. So what are the rights that they have? They have right to exist and flourish. Okay, these are the 6 rights that they have been given when we talk about their rights. So right to exist and flourish. Okay. One thing is, whenever we are talking about biodiversity, we are talking about 2 things. One is survival and the other is your reproduction. Okay, so these are the rights that they have. One is existing and flourishing. Second is right to maintain healthy populations, right? Then third is right to pollution free habitat, that is there should be no amount of habitat degradation or habitat fragmentation. And then right to ecological stable climatic conditions, because it is also counted as a threat to their habitats, right? Right to legal representation in cases of harm and regenerate natural cycles. Right to legal representation in cases of harm means that they must, because they cannot speak for themselves, therefore they must have some representative for them who will speak for them. Okay, mainly in the form of conservationists, right? That is human guardians. Okay. So we had these 2 cases. One was earlier case in which Animal Welfare Board of India versus A. Nagaraj. Okay, it recognized that even the animals have a right to live. Okay, with intrinsic worth, dignity, and freedom, and from unnecessary pain and suffering, and freedom from unnecessary pain and suffering. So any kind of, it is virtually a right to life for animals, right? And with respect to Muhammad Salim versus State of Uttarakhand, we had given personhood earlier, but now the status is now stayed upon. It is not something that we are extending. We had given a state of personhood to Ganga and Yamuna. That is, they will have a right to flow, and this flow will be clean flow, and this flow will be uninterrupted flow, and whatever the biodiversity is contained within it, that will also be protected. Okay, but this decision was later stayed by the Supreme Court, leaving the legal personhood status uncertain. Right now it is not certain yet because of legalities that are involved. Okay, we cannot define it properly. Okay, now the last news, Supreme Court stays Aravali judgment. Okay, so we know the case multiple times. Aravali Hills. So we talk about Aravali Hills, that is greater than 100 meter. Secondly, we talk about Aravali ranges. If I have 2 hills that are 100 meter, and this intervening area is 500 meter, then this becomes a range. Okay, and only these 2 are protected under the Supreme Court directive. Okay, but now it is being stayed upon. Why? Because it has been observed that by this definition, 90% will be out of the question. 90% of the area of Aravalli ranges will be exposed to the mining operations. Okay, so this has been stayed for now. Okay, so so this is all, and it talks about that in Rajasthan alone, about only 1048 out of 12,081 hills. Imagine, okay, that is 1 in 12 hills only meet this definition. Okay, others do not meet the definition. This means that I am also destroying what is your ecological continuity. Okay, on a definition that is not very scientific in nature, right? So it would qualify under this stringent criterion, potentially stripping lower hill ranges of crucial environmental protection. So expert committee proposal. So the committee has been proposed by the court that we should go for further analyzing how much amount of height should be required for developing certain kind of hill definitions. So we must have hill definitions, we must have assessment with respect to understanding what is the ecology being affected. Okay, to what extent can we allow the mining operations to exist in these areas, right? So such kind of mapping must take place, right? So it must be evaluating short-term and long-term environmental consequences, assess sustainable mining possibilities in excluded areas. That is, even with respect to the excluded areas, it should not be rampant. Okay, provide scientific basis for revised protection criteria, right? So the geographical extent is clear from our previous class also, 700 to 800 kilometers with respect to the length, right? And we have around this range. This is the southern section. Okay, southern section is Sambar Sirohi range. This is the southern part, and this is your northern part, Sambar Khetri range. Okay, so these are much lower in elevation. These are higher elevation. Okay, and these are more prone to erosion because of their lower levels. Okay, that is why we say that Aravalli Hills will protect from the extending of desertification from the Thar desert side, right? Okay, these are the functions. It acts as a desert barrier with respect to Thar desert. Second, groundwater recharge. Because of the increasing biodiversity, you will have more amount of vegetation present there, more amount of biodiversity present there. Climate regulation, again with respect to the planting of trees, right? It is also a watershed divide between the two rivers, that is Indus and Ganga, right? And it also extends the major tributaries including Banas and Sahibi, which feed Yamuna. Okay, Banas, okay, and Luni River you would know, it is quite common, that will feed into run of Kutch. Okay, so these are important rivers. We are talking about important biodiversity. We are talking about ecological continuity. Okay. So this is how it has been proceeding. You know, balancing protection and development. We are talking about sustainable development. We are talking about how to manage our economic activities, how to manage our environment conservation as well on both the sides, right? That is, one should not exceed the other. So November 2025, 100-meter elevation criteria was there. Then we moved on to the immediate response. Court takes up suo motu cognizance of environmental concerns. Current status is it is up to delayed, right? And the future action is that there is a recommendation proposal for a committee. All right. So this is with respect to the current affairs for this week. Okay. Thank you so much.